Our message this morning is on Esther, and of course we continue on in the Old Testament with the great patriarchs, and two of the women which are mentioned in the Scriptures would be Ruth, which we spoke on a couple of Sundays ago, and now Esther. I don't know if you knew this or not, but Esther is mentioned more times in the Bible than any other woman. And also, the name God is never mentioned in the book of Esther, even though His presence is real. Now, the story of Esther takes place in the Persian Empire during the reign of Ahasuerus, known more familiar to us in the Greek form of his name, Xerxes. He was the son of Darius the Great, who was Darius was one of the rulers of the Medo-Persian Empire. And of course, it extended all the way from India to Ethiopia. But Esther was a descendant of the tribe of Benjamin, which had been part of the kingdom of Judah. Her ancestors were among the Jews who had been carried captive in the Babylonian captivity nearly 100 years earlier. And there were many Jews who didn't return to Jerusalem because they had established themselves a home and they preferred staying in that area under the reign of Xerxes in the Persian Empire. But after the death of Esther's parents, she was raised by her uncle Mordecai, who served in the Persian ruler's palace. Now, the book of Esther also tells a compelling story to us, dramatic and exciting, which clearly defines heroes and also villains. It also reveals deep and abiding spiritual truth about God's power to deliver His people, even though God, the word God, is never mentioned in the book. And of course, though His name or direct reference to the divine does not appear in the entire story, nonetheless, God's presence and deliverance was very real when it came down to delivering His people. In chapter 4, which Billy has read this morning, some of the verses, the king was offended when his wife Vashti refused to appear before him after he had ordered her to do so. Now, what Xerxes was doing, he was pitching a big feast and a big party, and he wanted Vashti to perform for all the people there in the court. And of course, reading between the lines, he was expecting his wife Vashti to be very lewd and seductive in her dance. And of course, she refused to come to the party. And of course, you couldn't appear before the king unless he invited you. And if you went to the king not invited, it meant possibly death. So Vashti didn't appear. And of course, his advisors edged him and says, just remove her. Just remove her completely. And then seek out a new king, or a new queen for your companion. So the most beautiful virgin women was lined up in order for King Xerxes to view and to pick one of the women who were on display. Now, I believe God's providence in His hand had a part of this in Xerxes picking Esther. And I'm sure all the women that was lined up were beautiful women. But Esther, somehow or another, seemed to be more beautiful, more appealing than all the other women that Xerxes was viewing. Now, I think God just made her more beautiful because there was God's plan in this matter for Esther to become queen. And of course, we know the story that there was a man who was next to King Xerxes named Haman, and he hated Mordecai, and he went before King Xerxes and convinced Xerxes to destroy or kill all the Jews, because he convinced the king that they were a threat and they needed to be exterminated. Mordecai heard this news, and he went to Esther and pleaded with Esther, said, "Would you go before the king and tell him what's going on?" And of course, Haman was set up in an enormous amount of power and also property. And of course, for Mordecai to go before the king also, it would have meant death. And the only person that could go before the king would be Esther. But she could not go unless the king invited her to go. And Esther pondered this in her mind. But she, being a Jew, did not want to see her people destroyed and killed. It had been 3 months after Esther had become Xerxes' wife that he never saw her. There's no telling what Xerxes had done in those 3 months before Esther would even try to appear before him. She didn't know when the king would summon her to come in his court. However, Esther took it on herself, knowing that she could be killed in the process, went into the king's presence. And somehow or another, in the providence of God, the working of Almighty God, softened Xerxes' heart to where he would not carry out the edict of killing Esther by appearing without him asking her to come. Well, Haman was distraught. He thought for sure that he would get rid of all the Jews and Mordecai as well, because he hated Mordecai very strongly. He did not like the people. And Haman connived with the king and told him all sorts of things. And the king believed him, but when Esther appeared, she appealed to the king and revealed to him that she was a Jew, because Xerxes did not know she was a Jew when he chose her. And she laid it all out. And Xerxes listened to Esther and believed her story. And as a result, this story goes that Haman was hanged because of all of his conniving, because of everything that he wanted to do, and he was lying to the king, and Xerxes sent the order out, take Haman out and hang him and kill him. And all the properties that Haman owns, Mordecai will take control of it. And the Jews were preserved as a result of Esther interceding on behalf of her people. She could have been killed. All the Jews could have been killed. But in God's sovereign will, it was not meant to be. Aren't you glad that you and I fit into that same category? That God's sovereign will is a part of our life. In His great providence, you and I are sitting here today. There's a purpose in you and I being here. I know the storms were devastating that came to our area, but listen to this. Many people would say, why would God allow something like this so devastating to happen? Well, you would have to really ponder in your heart, did God have anything to do with it? However, in one of the books of the Old Testament, Nahum tells us that the clouds of the air are the dust of God's feet. Did he send the storms through our area on purpose? To hurt people? To destroy property? To get our attention? Does tragedies happen to us so that we can be drawn closer to God? Is that the purpose? That's questions that we ponder in our minds. Tragedies do happen. Devastation does happen. And when it happens, it seems like that people are drawn closer to God. We remember the story of 9/11, the event of 9/11. How that all of a sudden, because of what happened at 9/11 in our nation, it seems like a growth of patriotism sprung up as never before. But then it began to die down as time passed. And I'm sure in Esther's story, those Jews that were preserved knew in their hearts that their God, through the work of Mordecai first and through the work of Esther alone, preserved them. And they were able to live. Many, all of them were given the opportunity to go back to their homeland instead of being under the Persian Empire. But as I said momentarily ago, that many of them had gotten comfortable in that situation they were in, and they decided to stay in that land under the Persian rule. Many times we get comfortable where we are, and all of a sudden something happens to shake up our comfortableness, our being comfortable. And all of a sudden we realize God, in His great providence and His will, is working in our lives. Xerxes, on the other hand, was a corrupted man. He was a heathen. He was a fool. He did not believe in the God of Esther. But somehow or another, Esther convinced him that her people were real. Her people were special. And old King Xerxes and all of his rudeness and all of his hard-heartedness and all of his denial of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God softened his heart and allowed Esther's people to live. A similar story was found in the book of Exodus with Pharaoh. Every time Pharaoh would do something to the Jews, the Hebrew people, God then would soften his heart and He would allow certain things to happen, and then all of a sudden his heart would get hard again. Another travesty would be brought about the people of Israel. But you see, God works in mysterious ways, doesn't He? And that's how it is with us. Supernaturally, you and I were in the same position as Esther's people at one time. See, if Satan had his way, he would just love to take you and I out. And I'm not one to stand here and say, oh, well, Satan had his hand in all of this devastation that came about. I don't know. But I do know that Satan is the prince and power of the air. He's not all powerful, but he is powerful. But I'm glad that we serve a God who's more powerful than Satan. And God is the one that will allow Satan to do what he does. Whether it be devastating efforts. We need to realize this morning more than ever that God is in control. Mordecai believed that the end justifies the means, and it did. Oh, he worried about Esther's future. But as Christians this morning, in closing, we need to learn more so than ever that and recognize God's hands is in the middle of the escalating global sin and catastrophes that occur. These things that happen in our lives and around us, it should not worry us or make us anxious about the future, because the existence of people, church people, good-hearted Christian people, we must not get discouraged, and we must not give in from following God, even though bad things, terrible things happen and can happen to us. Because God, the God we serve, the God that Esther served, the God that Mordecai served, is fully capable of bringing good out of every bad situation. You agree with that? There was an evangelist back many years ago. He's gone on to be with the Lord. I remember looking at his programs on black and white television. And his theme song as he came on was, "Something good is going to happen to you today." And if I were to ask you who that was, you could probably tell me. But that was his theme song, coming on and going off. So something good out of all of this that we've gone through this past week, something good is going to come out of it. And we must believe that. In Christ's name. Amen. Our closing hymn, Are You Able? Page 530. Turn to 530.
Thank you for joining us for this message from Reverend Wayne McDonald. We would like to take this time to invite you to learn more about our churches by visiting us at calvarycharge.com or by following us on Facebook at Calvary Bethel Centennial. Remember that we are alive together in worship. As Ephesians 2:4-5 says, "But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ even when we were dead in transgressions. It is by grace you have been saved."